Though separated by nearly a century from Pound's early poetry, the Legionnaires' Lament by the Decemberists on their album Castaways and Cutouts, out 2002, connects analogous to one of the poems by Ezra Pound. Like Pound, with his Chinese poetry and Greek and Roman allusions, the Decemberists implicate history into their lyrics. In fact, the band's name comes from the Decemberists, or Russian revolutionaries who staged an unsuccessful coup d'etat against the Tsar in 1825. Carl Malloy, singer and songwriter for the band, said in an interview on the NPR segment All Things Considered, quote, "We the Decemberists kind of appropriate all sorts of history and make it our own," end quote. 4 months into the recording of Castaways and Cutouts, Operation Enduring Freedom began, which led Malloy to describe the band in an interview for the Oregonian as a, quote, "wartime band," end quote. In Castaways and Cutouts, specifically the song Legionnaires' Lament, Malloy's historical and imaginative songwriting style produces a song that addresses military life. Writing during 2 wars, feelings of war, separation, and sorrow fueled the lyrics of the Decemberists. The Legionnaires' Lament explores the isolation and grief felt by a legionnaire who, in line 14, quote, "is fighting in a foreign war," end quote. Pound's Song of the Bowmen of Sioux and the Legionnaires' Lament both tell of a soldier, in lines 27 through 28, quote, "longing for the old pecan of his homeland," end quote. During the chorus, the legionnaire is so dreary and isolated that he has mirages of his girlfriend going about her daily life while he is off fighting in a war far from home. His one wish is to be back in France, to feel the rain after a, quote, "year or more," end quote, in line 13, and the, quote, "desert dry," end quote, in line 8. In the second verse, he envisions Paris pompously continuing to enjoy the comforts of frigidaires, which are refrigerators, charabancs, or carriages, bagatelles, which is sidewalk music, and laudanums, which are drugs, while he sits in the desert fighting for a cause beyond his concern. Those CDs, like Castaways and Cutouts, were not around when Pound was on the literary scene. Canvas, paint, and brushes were all too readily available for artists such as Wyndham Lewis. Co-creator of Pound's Vorticist movement in London during World War I, Wyndham Lewis was an artist and close friend of Pound. In March 1916, Lewis joined the army, and in December 1917 was made an official war artist for the Canadian Artillery. Art critic Richard Humphreys believed Lewis relished war in no way, but worked energetically to record the soldier's life, for Lewis believed that the front was an extension of greed. As an official war artist, Lewis captured the brutality of the front lines in paintings like A Battery Shelled, painted in 1919. According to art historian and critic Francis Spalding, Lewis gave his figures, quote, "jagged movement and a, quote, terseness or abruptness to the smallest action in A Battery Shelled. The annoyance by Lewis's figures to the smallest action understates their sorrow and separation anxiety. They think the less they do, the quicker they will go home. The overstatement of the soldiers' sorrow and isolation are their faces. The men in the bottom left-hand corner of the painting have dreary, gaunt faces. On the contrary, the copper soldiers, in mid-action in the middle of the painting, do not bear any faces or facial features at all, because of the absence of happiness and hope and the overabundance of sorrow that hangs over the battery." Art critic Richard Humphreys characterizes the soldiers in A Battery Shelled as, quote, "insect figures blandly observed by a trio of indifferent colleagues," end quote. Looking at the entirety of the copper soldiers, they resemble machines as if war is a major industry. The smoke at the top of the painting comes from the battery and reaches from a building behind the officers, as if the industrial society is reaching out to the battlefield. Looking at the artwork in its entirety, the men are isolated with the desolate fields in the background, shabby battery emplacements, and empty orange supply containers half hidden by officers.